Katie Weimer joins us from 3D Systems, where she is the Vice President of Regenerative Medicine. And here's your correct intro slide, Katie.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us. I will give you the...
Well, first, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. It's quite an honor to be invited to this event. And I definitely wanted to give a shout out to Naomi as well. You probably don't remember, but I actually had a chance to meet you probably 10 years ago in the lobby of the Mahwah facility when you were doing your early research on the tritanium. So I really just want to thank you for the inspiration. It was a big, very inspiring moment for me, and it was great to be on stage with you today. So following up on her fantastic talk, I want to carry the theme really about how 3D printing is transforming patient care through full solutions. And I always think it's important to understand the perspective of the speaker. You know, I've spent my career in 3D printing in healthcare for over 13 years, had various roles from engineering to product development to business development, and recently had spent many years running our operations in the US and in Europe. And throughout that time really was an amazing experience for the 3D Systems healthcare team, where we touched over 140,000 patient specific surgical cases, had produced over 2 million 3D printed devices that supported over 90 CE marked and FDA cleared medical devices. Now I sit on our regenerative medicine and bioprinting team focused on innovating new solutions in that exciting space. And Naomi gave a great history of the AM perspective at Stryker, which is really impressive. I really wanted to take it back kind of holistically, obviously to Chuck Hull, who really pioneered this industry, and really look at what was healthcare's role throughout history using 3D printing, and certainly adapted some of this work from Andy Christensen. So thanks for letting me use some of your content. But really the first anatomic model, which we found was the first healthcare application using 3D printing, was actually produced back in 1988 by my colleague Scott Turner at 3D Systems and a really progressive radiologist, Dr. Mankiewicz. From there, that was really early application work, and we saw it over the next 10 years, anatomic models really being one of those early application areas, and could see selective coloration when you could see anatomy underneath. A few years later, one of the pioneers in actually using these models, the late Dr. Ken Salyer, who unfortunately just recently passed away, really attributed it to taking these models and using them for really advanced surgical planning in 2003. And then as Naomi would have presented, really in the early 2000s is when we got our start in titanium 3D printing. It was around 2007, where virtual surgical planning, which we know now in and of itself is its own industry, really was pioneered. 2008, things like personalized knee guides, which I'll talk a little bit about later, became common in orthopedics. 2010 was the first cleared FDA implant, and then really after that we've been off to the races, where from 2010 to 2015 alone there were over 80 cleared devices using AM. And then, as many other speakers have referenced, it was in 2017 when the FDA came out with really a guidance that has been a pathway for many others to take and use this technology in healthcare. So really there are head-to-toe applications, and certainly this is just our experience, everything from patient-specific cranial implants to a congenital heart defect anatomic model to, mass serial production of spine interbodies and hip cups in metal, to orthopedic cutting guides. And what we have found is it's very rarely just a hardware, just a software, or just a material. It's really a solutions approach to these applications in the 3D printing and healthcare space. And what started really, again, as a small group of people, largely pioneered by craniomaxillofacial and dental, again, the progressives of that space with things like planning out orthognathic surgery and dental drill guides. In the last few years, we have really seen such a broad clinical reach. There's great movement in radiology adopting this technology for anatomic models, oncology for partial nephrectomies and radiation accessories, orthopedics for surgical planning, and patient-matched implants, and even cardiology, as we talked about earlier, for things like structural heart and peripheral vascular disease. So it's really an impressive clinical reach that's transforming patient care. I know there's a lot of non-healthcare people on, in this, so I thought I'd start with a fantastic application, Anatomic Models, to help tell the story of transforming patient care. It's a pretty interesting workflow. It always starts with data acquisition. Then you have to turn that volume of medical imaging data into some type of, CAD environment where we can then move, edit and adjust, and then ultimately 3D print, followed by some aspect of post-processing as well. So again, typically starting with CT, MRI, even 3D surface scanning. You then intake and do what's called manual segmentation, or just segmentation in general. And those of us that grew up in the space spent many days looking at CT scans and doing manual segmentation, whereas now image processing has become more automated, where you can then pick a series of points, and then the automation algorithms can kick in and create that mask, which is ultimately becomes the three-dimensional object. Tours now even more sophisticated. You can simply load in a volume of data, rely on deep learning trained algorithms that can automatically identify what that anatomy is, and do automatically through deep learning the creation of these masks, which ultimately become your three-dimensional objects. From there, you go into a design phase, right? So a lot of times you have the full anatomy, and maybe you're only looking at some specific aspects, so you can delete, you can color, you can add cut planes, certainly add struts to things like thin structures, do the supporting of the model, and even labeling, of course, is really important for traceability. The part this group is super familiar with is the 3D printing, so no real introduction needed here. But we all know the various different technologies, and certainly some of the more common ones in healthcare are stereolithography, and you can see the color jet for visualization of anatomic models. And then we move into post-processing, which a lot of times is, kept in the back of the room, right? This is some of the dirtier work, but it's hugely important, especially when you get to diagnostic use and true medical use of these. This is a lot of time what differentiates an industrial versus a medical product is in the post-processing of these materials and of these technologies. So things like support removal, depowdering, UV curing, as you see here, and even to inspection at the end, which is, again, so critical in the healthcare space. So when we talk about transforming patient care, it's really all about the patient, right? So I'm going to give you some examples. Again, this one so kindly from the work of the late Dr. Ken Salyer, who was really a pioneer in taking and using these anatomic models. You can see even with Mark on them, take them into the surgical theater, use them to practice and cut, and you can see really got phenomenal results. Similarly with this young girl named Grace, who had a severe tessier cleft, a really severe hypertelorism. You can see the visualization that's provided in these anatomic models, can really lead to a fantastic clinical outcome. Something like, the case that is seen with Scarlett and Savannah, really cute young girls who are connected at the heart and even at the liver as well. And the advanced visualization you can get from an anatomic model can really be beneficial and really life-changing in the success or failure of some of these complicated cases. And if it doesn't necessarily make it into the operating room, these models are really valuable for surgical rehearsal. So what you're seeing here is an anatomic model being practiced on through a Da Vinci robot, practicing a partial nephrectomy of a tumor. And to get to this level of surgical rehearsal, we've got to get closer to these materials being biomimetic and acting and behaving a little more like the human body. Another great case case example of this is a surgical rehearsal of a ventricular assist device implantation in a failing systemic right ventricle. So you can see it was a really elaborate model, and the surgical team was able to practice from the beginning of cutting through the sternum all the way to the end after placing the VAD device and then closing back up again. The value of that anatomical model is really truly transforming patient care at that point. So if we take it a step further from anatomic models, really we're able to, in the digital environment today, take and utilize this data and pre-plan and practice the operation in the digital environment, and then create patient-specific, plan-specific models, guides, and templates that transfer that surgical plan to the operating room. We call this virtual surgical planning, and there's no better illustration of this than the case of Jaden and Anais. So you may have seen or read about this a few years ago now, but Jaden and Anais are craniopagus twins. I need to give compliments as well to the late Dr. Goodrich, who unfortunately passed to COVID last year. Was really a pioneer in this space and an innovator using this technology as well. But taking the case of Jaden and Anais, it's a very similar workflow, except, once you do the digital imaging, you do the image processing, instead of just printing anatomic models, you're able to do some type of virtual surgical planning and then print, patient-specific, plan-specific guides to use in the operating room. So let me walk you through that. Here's Jaden and Anais's medical imaging data. You can see the complexity of the brain tissue and the vasculature. We needed to take that and recreate that into three-dimensional digital models. Once we have that, right now you have all the luxuries of CAD. You can rotate, you can turn different geometries on and off, you can turn on transparency, and you can really get a different view of this anatomy that you really weren't able to have prior to this advances in technology from a few years ago. So you can again see the complex structures and imagine being the surgical team going into a case where of course there are not textbooks on this, and the ability to really look and study this anatomy is life-changing for this patients. Again, we can take that anatomy, and once we run through a surgical plan, and in this case, they had to separate the twins, so you can see the line there will be the osteotomies, the cuts in the skull. Then we're going to take that gap in the bone and use it to recreate a skull cap for the twins. So these cutting guides were really instrumental. And then you can see the series of the types, both, from a technology perspective, right? This is a couple different types of 3D printing technology and materials. You can see a surface scan of the twins. You can see a brain model that you can actually articulate apart and back together. Visualization models showing the vasculature, and then the cutting guides in the upper right. So how are these actually used? Until they're used, they're just very, beautiful, right? But what's their utility, and how are they helping transform patient care? You can see this model is actually used in the operating room to help even position the beds, understand how the surgical team was going to work in the operating room, and how the boys were going to rotate and move throughout the case. You can see Dr. Goodrich working with the interventional radiologist here, really looking at the anatomy throughout the case, coming over and referencing it back and forth, back to the patients, back to the model, back to the digital anatomy. Let's see. And then you can see, sorry, I couldn't advance there. This is really a critical moment where Dr. Goodrich was working with the interventional radiologist, and Dr. Tepper so elegantly said this was really a critical moment where we were either going to get around this really challenging vein in the sagittal sinus, or they were going to have to call off the operation. And without a doubt, it was the prints and the technology that helped get them there. So it's really a testament to how this is transforming patient care. And again, this is just, it's all about, the patient at the end of the day. And this is Jaden and Anais seeing each other for the first time. Here they are a few months later. I was lucky enough to get to be in the halls of Montefiore Hospital when they happened to come in. It was really a proud moment for the team. And then here I just looked on Nicole McDonald's Facebook, and you can see just the lovely family photo. So really, really touching. This technology obviously translates to many different types of reconstruction, and this is Blessing, just a lovely young man who unfortunately as a kid picked up a little metal wired object, which happened to be a mine that blew apart the bottom half of his face, which was then put together by nothing more than really almost a piano wire, right? Thankfully to Dr. Joel Berger and a group called Operation Hope, who was brought to the U.S. and able to use this technology, virtual surgical planning. And you can see him on the right a few years later with full dental restoration and engineering student up in Idaho. So really a fantastic story. Janet relays this as well. Similar, Dr. Hoffman was able to do a fantastic reconstruction and transform her life using virtual surgical planning. He was so kind just to send me these images just yesterday about where Janet is, and just to see that smile on her face is really phenomenal, and a fantastic tribute to what the technology can do. Many of you might have seen or heard of some of the face transplants that have happened. If not, I'll walk you through Patrick's story, which is incredible. Patrick is the man on the left. He's also the man who's severely burned, who through NYU in the hands of Dr. Eduardo Rodriguez was able to go through a full facial transplantation. The man in the middle is the donor of the face that Patrick now wears on the right. And the use of the technology to practice and perform this in the operating room really was instrumental. And again, to see Patrick, like he is now with his 4 kids, as you see on the right, riding a 4-wheeler. He says there's just no more stairs, there's no more frightened children. He's just a normal guy, which is all he ever wanted. Similarly with Andy, through the hands of Dr. Mardini in the Mayo Clinic, really was in a tough place in his life, and a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Although less skin than you saw transplanted from the previous case of Patrick, there was a lot of bony anatomy that was destroyed through that. And again, using the technology to help create patient-specific, plan-specific cutting guides to transfer the donor face onto the recipient, Patrick. And you can see, or Andy, you can see Andy on the right here, just an amazing outcome. And I love showing this because what you're seeing here is actually the widow of the donor who unfortunately lost her husband to a gunshot wound as well. And she so kindly was able to donate. And you see Andy just saying, I just wanted to show you your gift will not be wasted. And this is her, touching his face, which was from her husband. So really a phenomenal story. So you can call it virtual surgical planning, but we really know and feel that this is really personal surgical planning, right? And truly an inspiring use of the technology all around. To take you a little bit further down the technology pathway, right, you can think about using this type of digital content, this type of pre-planning, and applying something like advanced visualization from what I know a lot of groups are using, HoloLens, any other art, augmented reality setting. We really feel this is a big part of the future of how we can use and continue to advance technology, which is a core to the 3D printing space. And of course, as well, why not take it a step further from disposable cutting guides to something like a patient-specific implant? And although Naomi showed some of that with the Stryker CMF implants, there's not a lot of these cleared in the U.S. today. What you're seeing in the middle is actually a patient-specific spine interbody from a group called EIT from a few years back, a compassionate use case of a pelvis and a sacrum, and a really challenging case in the top right. And then one of the more common uses of patient-specific implants for pretty common case of revision hip, where just the stock component no longer fits. Is another progressive use of the technology. Almost as a counterpoint, I want to bring up the thought of what we call custom placement of stock or serial implants, like we refer to in Naomi's presentation, where you may not necessarily want to have the implant be patient specific, but perhaps a simpler and technique that could be more widely adopted is if you have a patient specific, plan specific instrumentation that helps place that stock component. So imagine you have a suite of knee implants in the OR. Well, why not pre-size that implant, pre-position that stock or serial implant, and then put all the complexity in the guide to perfectly fit that implant to the patient in the operating room. So I think a really interesting use of the technology that's really taken off in a couple of areas. Another example of this is in pedicle screw placement. So this is a patient, actually my father-in-law, who's been in a wheelchair as a paraplegic for many years. He had to go through and have a revision surgery to remove the old hardware that had deformed over time and place in new hardware in, and it's very challenging with that type of deformity in the spine to really understand and get those pedicle screws which hold the rods in place in the right position. But with the complexity in the guides, which you see these pedicle screw guides on the left, was really able to get a successful outcome and decrease the complexity of that case in the operating room. I don't think you can talk about 3D printing in healthcare and really the amount of impact it's had without talking about some of these amazing industries that were adopting mass customization. The two that come to mind, of course, are hearing aids. On the top, you can see the Phonak hearing aids, where almost 99% of the hearing aid market now is 3D printed. And of course, everybody knows the example on the bottom, Align, which started in 1997 with 5 employees and an idea. And now they've touched over 9 million smiles with a daily rate of printing over 500,000 or having 500,000 unique aligners manufactured a day. When you think about that, that is really a phenomenal number. So it is very real to be able to use and scale this technology with mass customization. A lot of what Naomi talked about, I'll touch on here, which is large-scale manufacturing of serial implants. And of course, orthopedics and spine are really the place where this is really impactful today. The two areas that have, I think, probably been affected the most are in hips and in spine interbodies. And really, it's not about complexity being in any patient-specific form, but really the complexity is in the geometry, and you saw some of that from Naomi's talk, to really fine-tune this for mechanical behavior, as well as things like bone ingrowth and cell ingrowth, or many different applications with this unique geometries. The workflow for this is obviously still very complex, not in the patient-specific component, but in the design aspect. You can then simulate it. You really have to go through this optimization prior to the build, manufacture. There's a lot of post-processing that happens in this that from the 3D printing side, the 3D printing part we say is really the easy part compared to a lot of the post-processing steps that take weeks past manufacturing, to inspection methods that are now available for this type of technology, ultimately delivering high quantities of these to the market. I'll try to demonstrate it with a video. The audio may or may not come through.
We focus innovation around the materials for the devices that we develop, particularly interbody spacers. One of the most exciting things about the NuVasive Advanced Material Science portfolio and 3D printing specifically is that we're really using the cutting edge of the technology to push our implant design as far as it can possibly go.
Additive manufacturing was something that allowed us to really start to add additional functionality to the devices.
With 3D printing being new to NuVasive, one of the biggest benefits of working with 3D systems was their know-how not only in using their machine, but their regulatory experience in being able to get a device cleared through the FDA as quickly as possible.
So one of the, last few points I want to talk about is around the manufacturing model. And I know a couple of the other panels and even presentations have touched on this, but we're really seeing a shift from a centralized manufacturing approach to point of care. And certainly there are many considerations which, clinical hospitals and point of care facilities need to consider, such as the personnel and the training and the regulatory and the QMS, and of course the liability of becoming the manufacturer of medical devices. And the FDA has been fantastic in working with industry and with hospitals and clinics to start to map out different scenarios based off of risk and help hopefully create some guidance in this space. But it's certainly somebody for anybody in 3D printing and healthcare to be aware of and keep our eye on and continue to support these discussions. Certainly from 3D Systems perspective, we're really thrilled about the partnership with the Veterans Health Administrations, where we'll be really helping establish FDA-compliant medical device manufacturing facilities across their 170 hospitals network within the United States. And this is just one of many great collaborations, I think, in this space that's happening now around point of care. In the last, now in my new place in regenerative medicine and bioprinting, this is to me really a big part of our future in healthcare. When I even say bioprinting, I'm talking about, and at least a definition that's generic that I like to hold on to, is really this intersection of 3D printing and regenerative medicine. There's lots of narrow, lots of broad definitions of what bioprinting is, but really I think it comes down to this intersection. And typically bioprinting is not, again, just about the printer. It's, some type of bio ink with biomaterials, bioactive molecules, and many people 3D printing with living cells. The printing itself, which is the hardware, the software, the firmware that runs the printer, and of course the print process. And lastly, a big part of bioprinting, which you don't see in many other areas, is this functionalization, which could be a bioreactor, an incubator, or even using the ultimate bioreactor, the human body, to mature these tissues. And we've seen a lot of growth in this area, certainly with something you can keep your pulse on, like the number of PubMed searches with the term bioprinting. You can see just an enormous amount of growth in the last 5 and even 10 years. Even a more generic gauge is the Google Trends search term bioprinting. You can see a relative interest over time in the last 10 years really increasing, which is just showing this, really improved adoption rate of people researching and collaborating and looking to grow businesses to transform patient care in this space. And when we're looking at bioprinting in healthcare, really we see a couple different areas on how we can be impactful. One is you're either improving or accelerating product development. And you can see a tissue chip up on the right. Or of course, ultimately, it's about bettering patient care and bettering patient outcomes. And what you see here is a vessel that's implanted in a rabbit for testing. And there's really no, in my mind, a better opportunity to transform patient care using bioprinting than the work that United Therapeutics and their subsidiary Lung Biotechnology, where their ultimate goal, their supreme objective, is to manufacture an unlimited supply of transplantable lungs. And you can see just from the, it's the beauty even and the impressive nature of this image. There's unbelievable advancements in this space and really excited to see what the future holds in bioprinting. So on that note, I wanted to just say thank you. Again, really excited to be a part of this group today.
Thank you so much, Katie. Thank you for sharing the stories. They were incredible, and I know a lot of people were talking about it in chat as well. We are almost out of time, but I want to ask one of the questions that came up. Can you talk a little bit about if hospitals and operating rooms in this country and around the world are starting to adopt these types of technologies?
Yeah, they absolutely are, especially anatomic models and simple patient-specific guides, printing in some of the more common plastics and polymer spaces. We're seeing a push from groups like the RSNA, the Radiological Society of North America, that are really helping bridge that gap between clinical, industry, and FDA, and made great advancements again. So we're seeing a lot of adoption in anatomic models, and then some in patient-specific guides and templates.
Great. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you.